Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. So today I have something very interesting for everybody. I have a new question and answer that was done by VentureBeat.com. The link to that question and answer page will be down in the description of the video if you guys are interested. And once we finish the question and answer, we'll talk about some of the things that we found out during this. So the first question is GamesBeat.com. GamesBeat asks, a lot is happening at Activision Blizzard in the news, and Diablo 2 Resurrected is the first game coming out since it started. You were in the last leg of development during this. Was it difficult pushing through the last bit of work with everything going on? Rob Gallerani replied, it's a super important question. We're not living under a rock. We were lucky to be working on something that we were all so passionate about. We kind of focused on that. We wanted to make sure we supported our coworkers. Yes, it's about games, but it's also about our people and our coworkers. A lot of us, we focused on putting something out there that we could be proud of, just as much as it's our game, it's the community's game. This is people's nostalgia, people's childhood we're talking about. That helped. Not that it wasn't stressful. We're dealing with people's nostalgia, and they'll let us know if we get it wrong. GamesBeat said, how has morale been at the studio? Gallerani replied, our cinematic trailer, that was amazing. Yes, we had seen it in takes, but when you really see it out there, that helped a ton. And then you think, oh yeah, wait, 9 days? This is going to be a real thing. My daughter likes to call it nervous-sighted. We're equal parts anxious and really excited to let the world finally see what we've been working on. Kevin Todisco said, being this close to release, you can feel the excitement bubbling as it's reaching a crescendo in everything as we get that much closer to it. This website is quite obnoxious. The ads are constantly changing sizes, and every time the ads change sizes, the text on the page is shifting around, and it makes it very difficult to read the text when the size of the ad shifts and all the text on the page shifts, and I have to refine my location. So please bear with me. Lessons. GamesBeat said, what did you learn from player feedback from the tests and the alphas and betas? Gallerani said, the beta was great because we had the closed beta transitioning into the open beta. We kept doing support all the way through. The number of players just skyrocketed when it went open. Over the course of that week, we added more servers. We got to see more of the social aspect. From the alpha, we learned a lot about how it compared to people's nostalgia, how it hit their memories, but it was all single player. A lot of feedback we got was things like, tune this icon, tweak how this spell effect works, this one monster should look this way. Then, as we shifted to a multiplayer experience, we got a lot more insight into the infrastructure and how our servers held up. You couldn't test it any other way. You can't just pretend to have 2 million people play the game. You have to put it through those paces to do it. On the other side, there were the social aspects. Things like how lobby worked, how chat worked, how forming a party worked. Those were all good insights. One big thing we changed. We had something that identified when someone joined your trade channel. That worked fine when we tested it, but we didn't think about what would happen when you had 1 million plus people joining or leaving your trade channel. You probably don't care so much about that. To Disco, it's definitely invaluable to test at scale. Understanding what happens when you have a bunch of people playing the game at the same time, and being able to get a large-scale presence to understand stability and make stability and performance improvements as we head into release. GamesBeat said, can you give me an idea of the makeup of the team? What percentage of it is Vicarious Visions, and what percentage of it comes from the original Blizzard? Well, we're all Blizzard employees now, laughs nervously. The team is pretty big. Folks have come and gone in between. It's hard to draw the line because we also have different teams. We have the Q&A team. We have the localization team. Our game is coming out in all these different languages, including new languages that weren't in the original game. It's hard to come up with numbers as to how this all breaks down. But when it comes to the responsibility, who makes the calls, this is a special project. We weren't creating a new game. We weren't inventing what the new fun was. We were going off the original game. We were targeting the most authentic experience you remember. That's why the ability to toggle the graphics back and forth is super important. The ability to confidently say the original code is running underneath. The original balance that drove all our decisions whenever we would reach a point where we asked, what should we do from here? We'd look back at that. That's how our team was driven as a guiding force. GamesBeat says, Warcraft 3 Reforged was Blizzard's last remake. That came under a lot of criticism. Do you feel Resurrected needs to answer for that? Gallerani said, with Resurrected, we had to get it right. It's so important to a lot of people. We had to get it right in a way that also let people play how they wanted to play. For example, we added auto gold pickup. Auto gold pickup is something that, at least from the alpha and beta, is unanimously loved, but we let people turn it off. Same thing goes for the entire game. If you like the original Diablo 2 with your mods, that's still there. It's not going anywhere. All of that is still safe for you. We're putting ourselves out there and hoping we did it justice, that people want it, but that's an approach we felt was right just because it's such an important game for people. Todisco said, from the very beginning of the project, from its undertaking, it was of paramount importance for us to keep the original experience intact. In remastering, there's also the original game that exists separately from the beginning. The reason why we made the decision to use the same original Diablo 2 engine was because we wanted to make sure that the core gameplay loop, the core mechanics, the feel of the game all remained exactly the same. We would work around that by layering a new 3D layer on top of that so as to keep that experience intact. GamesBeat says, you talked about the cutscenes a bit and that cinematic trailer that was one of the criticisms of Reforged, not having the redone cutscenes. You went all out for that on Resurrected? Was that something you had to push for, or something that everyone was on board with doing early on? Gallerani said that was something that became more and more obvious as we brought the game forward. The cutscenes are iconic. They're a testament to the era that they were made in. But when we started going into Lutgo Lane and adding sand blowing off dunes, you've got real-time lighting and dripping sewers and everything is in 4K. And then you switch back to the older cutscenes, it broke the immersion. The more we worked on bringing everything in the game up, the more it was obvious that this was the right thing to do with the cinematics. When we did it, though, like everything else, it's the same audio track, it's the same scene, shot for shot, which was also fun. There was this archaeology of learning how things worked. One example is in the very beginning when Tyrael goes to visit Marius. In his cell, the gate opens. It just opens as if he has some power. In the original storyboards, there was supposed to be a warden standing there to open the gate for him. But for whatever reason of cost, they ended up cutting that character, but still kept the gate, so we kept the gate. There were all these little things you'd switch over and see. That's how it really was. It allowed us to really geek out on the cutscenes. Todisco says, very much in the same spirit of that one-to-one relationship, shot for shot, the cinematics mirror that careful relationship we have between the new HD graphics and the original sprite graphics. GamesBeat says, it's impressive that you're able to look at the original storyboards. Was there a lot of original documentation that you went through? Todisco said, folks did a lot of archaeology, trolling through file servers, looking for anything we could dig up and find assets. Rob could probably give even more detailed stories on it. I do know there are some things, like original textures for the Act 2 tombs that were pulled forward into the new game. Tyrael's wings, for example, are the original model from the old game that they used to render out Tyrael. Gallerani said, it was all across the board. While we had the code, we had some models of these things. We had marketing docs that were written for some magazines 20 years ago. We had a different render of a different stall from the market in this one town. It was all across the board, these different assets you would discover and piece together. In some cases, we just used the exact same concept art they had. Other times we found the same art that they referenced from museums, some armor in the game. The picture that they had found on the internet was the same picture we found on the internet. To change or not to change. GamesBeat says, you talked both about how important it is to stay true to the original game. Were there any bigger changes you were tempted to make and had to talk yourselves out of? Gallerani said, when we looked at a lot of this original documentation, there were a lot of other ideas that had been tried before. One of the original ideas, I think it's come up in past interviews, is the concept of a player city. When we first started, we thought that might be cool, but we realized that just because it could have been made, and even if there were other intentions, that's not what the public saw. Not quite sure I understand what he's saying there. Let's reread that one more time. Sometimes it helps to reread a passage. When we first started, we thought that might be cool, but we realized that just because it could have been made, and even if there were other intentions, that's not what the public saw. That's not what their childhood was. We decided to get the game right first before we started to try and change it. So basically what he's saying there is, in a nutshell, that the player city never existed. So because the player city never existed, they're not going to add it into the game because that's not what it was back then, which I think is a little silly. The player city sounds kind of neat. I think that would be a good addition. Sounds like a natural development of Diablo 2. But I digress. This notion of, oh, you should rebalance the game, you should fix these things, that kind of went away. We're not trying to fix the game. We're not trying to build Diablo 3. That game's already been made. It turns out Diablo 4 is taking it to other places, and so is Diablo Immortal. This is a piece of history that we're bringing into the modern era. We're allowing a new generation to experience it. When you look at it like that, what you can change and what you shouldn't change when you first come out is a little bit easier to make a call on. Todisco says, I'll have a reverse example, I suppose, or a backwards example. It's not that we intended to change something like the lightning, for example, but early on in development, we had a situation where we were creating this brand new physicality-based rendering for the project, and you get to a point where that all works, and you look at it. We used what we called the squint test, making sure everything matched what was in your mind's eye or matched what was in the sprite-based game. And it doesn't pass because the item on the ground over there is too dark, I can't see it, or the character doesn't stand out from the environment enough. We reached a crossroads where we could say it's real, it's light, it's real lightning. It matches the intention in terms of visceral realness, but it's not quite the same readability, it's not the same experience. Do we want to move forward with something like that? And the answer is that we have to pass that squint test. We started layering more technology on top of that allowed us to make the items stand out more, flatten the grass they're sitting on so you can see them, make the characters pop by giving them some extra lighting on top of what's already there. And Gallerani is adding in, I remember when we had the harem level below the palace in Act 2, there are pillows all over the place. In the original game, it was just a flat image of pillows. When a sword would fall, a very long sword would just lie in whatever spot because it's a picture of a sword sitting on a picture of pillows. When we have a 3D sword that you drop in a pile of 3D pillows, either we have the physics kick in and tilt the sword a different way, which we can't do because where you click is the same, and so we have a sword that lie the same way it laid in the original game, but now the sword would be cutting through the pillows or underneath the pile of pillows. So we always render things on the ground as if they were on top, which is totally not how the real world works. We built it to be like the real world and then had to break it so it matched the 2D game that was trying to pretend to be a 3D game. Todisco said there's another interesting trick I could mention with the auras. An aura in a typical game, it sits at the character's feet. In Diablo 2 Resurrected, it looks like that aura is right at the character's foot level, but it's actually not. The problem we ran into is the aura would start to clip with things that were also by the character's feet, like grass or rocks or chests, things like that. We put a trick in. We actually moved the aura toward the camera, but we draw it in order so it looks like it's underneath the character. It still looks like it's at foot's level, but it's not. I actually noticed that during the beta. Something seemed wrong with the auras. It didn't seem quite in the right spot. GamesBeat said Diablo has already been on console and had controller support with Diablo 3. Was that harder to make work with Diablo 2? Gallerani said, we had a lot of things we had to keep in mind when we brought in controller play. First off, we knew that a lot of people were accustomed to playing Diablo 3 with a controller, would come over to play Diablo 2 the same way. They already have some expectations, but we also have cross progression, and so there were certain changes that were made between Diablo 3 console and Diablo 3 PC to account for that. We didn't make any changes, not only because we couldn't make them due to cross progression, but because it went against keeping the game as true to the original as possible. That's when we went forth with it, deciding you actually have to play inventory Tetris. You have to pick things up. We had to write a lot of code to make moving the cursor with your thumb feel playable in that space. The way you move your character is totally different, though. Diablo 2 is a game that came from the era of pencil and paper games with people on grids. Under the hood, Diablo 2 characters are on a grid. When you use the thumbstick to run around, it doesn't feel good to click grid squares. You wouldn't notice it with keyboard and mouse because you would just click somewhere and your character would walk to that grid square. But when you use a thumbstick, you can walk wherever you want. Trying to stop on a certain spot felt really bad because you would just snap to that point on the grid. We added tech to allow you to stop in between squares to walk very slowly or very fast depending on your stick deflection. But Diablo 2 also has stamina mode where you're running or walking, and we had to have that work within it. It definitely added a whole nother dimension. We didn't change as much as we could have, but we did change a lot more than we wanted to. People also asked if we would add a dodge move because Diablo 3 had a dodge move. You really don't need a dodge move, though. The fact that you actually feel more mobile with a thumbstick, you can make those moves anyway, but it is a slightly different experience. It's easier to target a very specific spot. We do targeting for you with a controller because there is no cursor. That works for targeting monsters and things like that, because we can see what you're pointing at and what responds. But when it comes to things like the Sorceress's Teleport or the Necromancer's Golem creation, you just click anywhere in the world. So how do we do that? We tried things like, well, maybe you hold the button and you can bring up a cursor. That just slowed down the pace of the game, especially if you're trying to play Nightmare or Hell. In that case, when you're using the controller, we just pick a default spot and that's where you teleport. That just worked better, especially for people who use speedrunning and teleport everywhere. It's just a different way to experience it, but it worked best for controllers in this game. Platforms. GameSpeed. With all these different versions coming out, and because we've seen other games with multi-platform releases where the Switch version is maybe struggling, how is the Switch version of Diablo 2 running right now? How is the performance? Oh, that's very interesting. A lot of people want to know this. Gallerani, I think it's running like butter. Running like butter. I like playing it in the undocked portable mode. But yeah, with all our consoles, we built them for that experience. We didn't want it to feel like we just ported a PC game to the console. We wanted it to be what was right for that console. We've taken a lot of things into consideration with the Switch, especially if you play in portable mode. Everything is a lot tinier, just overall attention to things like how big is the font, how are things laid out on those screens. Those are all things that we had to cater to that device to play up its strengths. Todisco says, same goes for a lot for the 3D visuals. It's tailoring the experience for that smaller screen, the handheld screen that can be swapped out for a larger screen if you dock the console. With every platform, we make sure that we tailor the technology to give the best experience on that particular platform. The Switch version is very good. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it, being able to take it on the go for the first time. GamesBeat says, at the other end of the spectrum here, what can people look forward to from the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X versions? Todisco, it's all about pretty graphics. We want them to look the best they possibly can to represent those platforms and also perform likewise. I think people are going to be happy with the next-gen versions of the game, giving them the best visuals experience we can possibly give them. And now we're on to the future. GamesBeat says, what is the post-launch support going to look like for Resurrected? Gallerani, right when we come out, we won't have a ranked ladder. The reason we're doing that is because we're also going to be watching the game to continually support it as it comes out. With ladder, obviously it's a race to hit level 99, and the moment the clock turns over and everyone jumps in, we want that to be as smooth as an experience as possible. Right now, we can definitely commit to supporting the game, improving that experience for everyone, and hitting the start of our first, well, I don't even know what season we're on in real ladder, but we'll probably call it the first season of ladder in Resurrected. From there, we'll see what the community wants. We don't really make a boxed product anymore where we give it to you and we're done with it. It's a live game, a live service. We'll continue to have that relationship between us and the community as they start playing it. Is new content on the table, like Act 6? Is that a possibility? Gallerani said, I will never deny it. It's not on the table right now, but it's not off the table either. Like I said, we're focused on getting that authentic, nostalgic experience right. Even smaller things like returning how the Blizzard works, or maybe making a build that's not a Hammerden, new rune words, new items, those are really exciting things, but we want to make sure we stick the landing first. As long as the community says, yeah, you did good, then we can have the next discussion. I like how he even made a personal slight against Hammerdens, or maybe making a build that's not a Hammerden. I digress. GameBeat, where is a lot of this team going now? Are they staying behind for support on Resurrected, or are they moving elsewhere? Is there a secret Diablo 1 remake that they're all jumping to? So many secrets, Gallerani says. We can't really speak to exactly where we're going right now. I'm pretty busy making sure this game gets out on time. I commend your confidence that everything is perfect and we can start rolling everyone off right now. But for now, we need to stay on Resurrected, at least for 9 more days, or maybe 10. Todisco, for those 9 days, we tend to tunnel vision a bit on making sure we have the smoothest release possible. Then we'll start to consider what comes after that. GamesBeat says, with everything that's been happening at the company and you having the first release after that, do you feel any pressure, or do you try not to think of it through that lens? Todisco says, I'll say that leading up to any game release, there are a certain amount of pressure and stress involved. Just shipping a game is hard. It's really dominated by just that. We're about to ship a game. Gallerani says, this is people's childhood, right? This is people's nostalgia. We've actually gotten great feedback throughout the alpha and beta, and even the littlest of little things. Oh, that doesn't sound quite right, does it? That lightning effect isn't thick enough. I said that myself. The color of that one effect, that the monster in that one level, they'll let us know, knowing that we have the weight of people's nostalgia, their childhood, why they even got into the franchise. That's the biggest thing in driving us to do this as best we can. Interesting. So we got a lot of little tidbits here, and I kind of want to go over some of the highlights. So first off, they're talking about being excited and also anxious because, they're very worried that we're not going to like the game. Which is certainly understandable. He called it nervous-sighted, which I guess makes sense. And then they talk about all the lessons that they learned from the alpha and beta, which is good information. And there's a very good point here that they're talking about, and he's talking about you couldn't test it any other way. You can't just pretend to have 2 million people play the game. And this is a very important point because, when it comes to looking at how the effects of something change, like the trading economy or the way that people play the game or what characters people choose or how they interact with each other, you can't simulate that. You really need to see how it develops. And that's something that is only ever going to come with, number one, experience of seeing that firsthand, and number two, of seeing it firsthand. So it's just it's something that they're going to have to watch and pay attention to. And then the next thing we have here is them coming under attack because Warcraft 3 Reforged was kind of messed up, and basically them talking about how they didn't combine the two games. So if you guys were unaware, they combined Warcraft 3 and Warcraft 3 Reforged together, and like they were kind of like the same game. And apparently they kind of broke the original by combining it with the new one. From what I understand, so basically what he's saying here in a nutshell with this is, if you like the original Diablo with your mods, that's still there. And the reason why he's saying that is he's not trying to say, if you don't want to play Diablo 2 Resurrected, go play the original. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that if for some reason they screw up and Diablo 2 Resurrected isn't the game that you had hoped it would be, it's you're still going to have the original to go back to, and the funny thing is that with Warcraft 3 Reforged, you didn't have the original to go back to, and I think that was part of the issue. And then we also have here the cinematics, and they're talking about how they constantly were going back and forth looking at the original cinematics and comparing them to each other. Todisco said very much in the same spirit of that one-to-one relationship, shot for shot. Cinematics mirror that careful relationship we have between the new HD graphics and the original sprite graphics. And so it's very similar to what they're talking about, and what they've mirrored the entire time is that they want to preserve the original gameplay and the original feel of the original game as much as humanly possible, and that even bleeds into the cinematics. And they were very clear on this. They were like, we were increasing the quality of the graphics in the game, and then when it went back to these old cinematics, the old cinematics would just break you out of the immersion. So very, very, very good observations there, I think, because immersion is very important to a video game. A lot of people will overlook immersion, but immersion is one of those things that if you are immersed in a video game, you will continue in that video game for such a long period of time. But the moment that you are broken out of the immersion, it's almost like someone snaps their fingers, and all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, oh, what am I doing? Why am I in the world of Diablo killing demons? I was very interested in this information they had about the old storyboards, and how they had a lot of like just random pieces of information. Apparently they didn't find like everything, but Todisco was saying, the original tester files for the Act 2 tombs, and then like Tyrael's wings, and then they're talking about like they found some random cart that was never added into the game, and so forth and so on, and the original pictures that they made the armor from the museums. And so they don't have everything, but they have a lot, and that's why they're calling it like archaeology, because they actually have to go back and they have to like piece things together. And often in archaeology you might not find all the pieces of a pot, but you might find enough of them that you can kind of figure out what the original shape of the pot might have been. And so that's very interesting there. So very, very much so, everything that they're saying is like, hey, we don't want to change the game. Hey, we're trying our best to make sure that it's true to the original. Hey, we want to make sure that nostalgia is still there. We don't want to ruin that childhood memory that you have. Very, very interesting. Next we have to change or not to change, and this is them talking about like adding Act 6 and crazy things like that. And it's interesting that he basically says, yes, but also no. So, very, very simply put, and as succinct as I can make it, they're basically saying we want to make sure we get the game right first. So, we're going to paint this painting exactly as it was. And then once we've painted the painting exactly as it was, then we will go back and we will see if we can make some improvements. But they're very, 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 very strict here on this. It seems like they are never going to make any changes to the game until they can make sure they've got the game correct first. And then once they've got the game correct, once they've got everything in place, then they're thinking about, hey, then we can look at possibly making some changes, and I kind of like that. So the player city thing was really interesting. I really thought the player city thing would be a good idea. I think I've actually talked about this a couple times with some people before I even heard of the player city, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we had a big lobby we could all join and we could all stand around and talk to each other and stuff. I thought that would have been really neat. And again, that's kind of what the player city sounds like. And then, of course, we also have the controller support, and how they were trying to make sure that the Diablo 3 players would be comfortable in Diablo 2. But then they ended up saying we didn't make any changes. So, it's interesting because, they're like, we acknowledge the fact that the Diablo 3 players might want to come in and actually pick it up and just move on. But at the same time, they're like, hey, we're not going to make these changes because that would change the core of what Diablo is, and we're not going to do that. But they kind of did their best to, I guess, translate it over. And we also have a lot of information on the Nintendo Switch version here, which I think is very interesting. And this comment he made about it, I think it's running like butter. He could have chosen a better word there. I feel like he could have chosen a better word. He said, I like to play it in the undocked portable mode, but yeah, with all our consoles, we built them for that experience. So it's very obvious by the screenshots that we've uncovered for the Nintendo Switch version that it was built very specifically for the Nintendo Switch. And he's talking about how it's a lot tinier and how they had to like pay attention to like the size of the fonts and make sure that things were actually readable. So that's very good that they paid attention to that, because I have seen a lot of games on the Nintendo Switch that were basically unreadable. And he also talks about, he says, Todisco says, same for a lot of the 3D visuals. It's tailoring the experience for that smaller screen. And then he also says, and when you swap it out for the larger screen. So I am hoping that the visuals will get better when you put it in docked mode. I'm hoping there will be a considerable bump in the quality of the graphics when it has its full power. As I think most people are, I'm very anxious to see how the Nintendo Switch version looks. I really want to get my hands on it and do a little bit of streaming with that version. Post-launch support, and he's talking about how ladder is going to be delayed, and how they really want to get the game running properly first before they start on ladder. And I can understand that because they're probably going to be applying a lot of patches and various things to fix bugs that come up as we start playing. And I can definitely see from their perspective that they would really like to get the game smoothed out a little bit first before they hit that, as they said, hit the timer on the ladder and set everybody loose. Kind of like firing off the gun at a race. And I can understand it. I just hope they don't delay it too long, because if they delay it too long, people are going to get upset. Who knows exactly how long they're going to delay it. And, like I said, we were talking about Act 6, and, Gallerani said, I will never deny it, but it's not on the table right now. But it's not off the table either. Like I said, we're focused on getting that authentic nostalgic experience right. So it's very clear that they're trying to make sure that they get their foundation in place first. They want to make sure they've got the foundation poured, everything is right, the building doesn't fall down. Once they make sure the building is safe and sound and it doesn't fall down, then maybe they'll think about, painting the outside or adding some solar shingles or whatever. But they're not going to do any of that before they've got everything in place. Once they got everything in place, once they've verified everything is working and the house is right and then the roof isn't leaking and all that stuff, then maybe they'll go back and they'll start making some changes, which I can totally understand. And I hope that those changes end up being more of a discussion with the community, because I feel like the community deserves a little bit of say in what's going on. So we also have this other comment by GamesBeat, which is talking about Diablo 1 Resurrected, and I would really like to see Diablo 1 Resurrected. And Gallerani literally said, so many secrets, with an exclamation point. And he goes on to explain how he can't tell anyone what's going on, and they still have at least 10 days after launch where everyone is really going to be focused on making sure that launch goes smoothly. But Diablo 1 Resurrected sounds really nice. GamesBeat said, with everything that's been happening in the company, and you having the first release, do you feel any pressure? And this is where I kind of like what I'm getting at here is he's like, this is people's childhood, right? This is people's nostalgia. We actually have gotten great feedback throughout the alpha about even the littlest of little things. And he goes on to have this, it's kind of like a, I don't want to say droning. I want to say like minuscule like things that people would complain about, and the minuscule things that people would complain about, they're tiny, but these are big parts of people's childhood, and they're trying to make sure that they've got their childhood intact, I guess. And a lot of people are, they were children when this game came out, and then they're going to go back and they're going to relive that childhood, and I think that nostalgia is in a lot of cases with older games, the game does not live up to the nostalgia. And I think this is going to be one of those times, one of those rare times where the game does live up to the nostalgia. And in fact, I think the game might actually surpass the original nostalgia. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching these videos, and keep watching.